I don't think so, but I don't know. All right. So thanks for coming to class. Sorry the roll thing took so long, and then you had to hear about allergies while I was taking roll. But dang, there's a lot of allergies right now. So we wanted to talk about the book review and then some due dates and then the weekly stuff. Maybe not in that order. And your weekly questions not really due this week. That is just sad, isn't it? No weekly question this week. But yeah, it gives you a chance to make yours really good or to work on the book review, which is due Monday, May 3rd. Excuse me, that was a cough. And yeah, okay. All right. So let's first start with book review chat. Thank you. Let me see if I don't think I have the book review document open. So let me find it really quick. I guess I wasn't planning to talk. How rude of me. So let's do that. Sorry for the yawn. I think also you have the sample book review. Yeah, you have the sample book review. Dang it. I don't see the book review thing. Oh, I know it's in there. I have the 1301 book review, which is very similar. Let me find 1302 book review. Dang. Dang. We'll look in the fall ACC class. I bet it's there. There it is. All right, let me show it to you then. So you'll believe me. All right. Goodness. All right. Book review. And then I'll check the chat again in case I missed something. Yeah, somebody keeps emailing me because I haven't graded their papers yet. I know. It's because you turned them all in on the 26th. You turned in 2 months worth. So stop asking me about it. Give me a chance. I'm trying to catch up. I'm behind. So sorry about that. All right, sorted. Sorry about that. Except, dang, you turned in 2 months worth of stuff. You got to give me a chance. You took 2 months. What's due different weeks? The book review? I don't know. We'll look at the syllabus here in a second, or you can clarify that in the chat and then we'll double check. 2 weekly questions due next Friday. Yeah, I thought I don't think the class ends next week. I think it ends the week after. So let me double check on that. So thanks for bringing that up. But we'll check that after we look over the book review. If it seems like I'm going to forget, feel free to remind me. You know. All right. By the way, whichever one of you likes, you guys give me a hard time because my attention span's short. Yeah, I graduated from college though, didn't I? It's a sign. There's hope for some of you too. All right, book review. I even got decent grades. It's shocking. Book review. So you are picking a book. You're going to read the book. And then you're going to tell me what you thought about the book, what was in the book, what you thought about the book. And the mistakes that people typically make on the book review are when they don't actually read the book. Makes it hard to write a good review. 2, they plagiarize. No plagiarism. And 3, they don't follow the format of the book review. And that's oddly the most frustrating one because usually the people who do that actually clearly read the book. So that makes it harder for me to grade because the rubric is really based on the different parts of the book review. Like each part is worth 4 points or 6 points or something like that. So if you don't do it the right way, it makes it really hard for you to get all the points you would like to have. And you kids love points, adults too. I know some of you have a good age range in this class. All right, so the book review needs to be about 1,500 words, which is 4 to 5 pages when you type it and use kind of your standard font. Also, just please, whatever the normal font is that just shows up in your, when you type, you know, in a word processing program, use that. Don't do like a wingding or script. Don't make it red. Oh my gosh, just type it. So it's usually people do what, Courier or Times New Roman or something. I don't know what you do, whatever shows up, but just don't do a weird font that's hard for old people to read. Okay, all right. So normal font, black ink, please. Okay. Also, I graded two book reviews so far. And one of them, the person sent it in early for feedback, which if you want to do it pretty quickly, by Thursday or Friday morning, maybe. If you do Friday night, it's tricky for me because soccer all weekend. And yeah, Friday night after I come in from Friday night soccer is not a good time for me to grade papers. Just trust me on that. Just some parent screamed at me about something silly. Um, Things that I've noticed so far. And that I consistently notice. Don't start off your book review without saying the name of the book. I know that sounds weird, but sometimes people will put the book review, the book name and the title, and then they'll say like this book. You can't start off a paragraph with this. You can't start at the beginning of your paper with this. No, that's a pronoun. It has to refer to something. You haven't said the noun yet. So say the name of the book somewhere in the first sentence of your paper, please. Then you can say this book after that. Okay. Thing number 2, don't call the people in your book by their first name. You're not friends with them. They're not characters in a book. I mean, they're not, characters in a novel. They're actual folks. So unless you happen to know them, which you probably don't call them by their first name. You typically call them by their last name. Yeah. Or their full name. But if you have to pick one, the last name. All right. Number 3, we're up to 3 now. Write in past tense when you talk about parts 1 and 2, especially because you're writing about what they talked about, what they did, their life. They're no longer with us, most likely, and they didn't do it today. So since it is past, it's the perfect time to use the past tense. Yeah. So use the past tense. All right, I'm checking the chat. Okay. Yeah, you can refer. The only time you really wouldn't want to refer to them just by their last name is if their last name is Adams, or, like there's been 5 of them that are important in US history. So then you can call them like JQ Adams or J Adams. And there are certain people it's completely acceptable to refer to by their initials, like MLK Jr. or JFK or FDR. Those guys, they're legit. And I don't know why you would be writing a paper, but there's sometimes one name people like Madonna. But yeah, I don't think you're writing a book about Madonna or a book review about Madonna. No one's ever done that. That'd be weird. Or Prince, or he was a symbol. The end of his career. Or ice. Okay. So initials, last name are good. Okay. So format of the book. You got to follow this, okay? So 4 to 5 pages, 1,500 words. Please put the word count on there. Yeah. I think there's something in the review or someplace, one of these settings, where it'll give you the word count. So don't count the words. You know what I'm saying. All right. And if not, like do a little Google search that said, how do I find word count? And it'll tell you. Like I just had to put an HTML, a hyperlink in HTML. Do you think I know how to do that? No. So I had to look that up. Google. It tells you everything. Not history though. Okay, so part 1. This should be about a page long. And this is where you tell me the basic outline of the book. So like the first third of the book was about Frederick Douglass as a child and where he grew up and, these 2 owners and how he learned to read and that sort of stuff. And then the middle of the book was more about, Frederick Douglass as an adult and still a slave and how he got in trouble and how he eventually got his freedom. And then the third part of the book, like the last 4 chapters of the book, were about Frederick Douglass living in the North as an abolitionist, that sort of thing. So just a really general outline of the book, really, really general. So not a play-by-play of the book. That's a book report. And we don't do those in college. Yeah, we don't. That's more of, an elementary school kind of thing. So book review, we want to know what happened in the book, but more we want to know what you thought about the book and why the author wrote the book. Okay, so part 1 is really short and it's the book report part of the book. Okay, and it's going to be concise and precise. Part two. This is where you talk about why the author wrote the book, the author's thesis. Now, if you are not sure why the author wrote the book, that's sometimes a bad sign. But sometimes it means maybe the purpose isn't as clear. You know, it may not be your fault. So not that you didn't pay attention. It's just like maybe it wasn't as focused or you're not sure. So places you can look for sure. Sometimes the introduction of the book or the foreword of the book will tell you why the author wrote the book. Yeah. Sometimes the author himself just or herself just says, here's why I wrote the book. Historians tend to do that, but I think they're afraid that you're not going to notice, or sometimes they are bad writers, or they just want to be really straightforward with you. Like, this is what I'm trying to prove. And this was my focus when I wrote the book. That is typically what historians do. You know, these aren't novels. They're not some weird deep meeting. You know, we're not trying to get you to know yourself better when we write. Although you can certainly learn a lot about yourself when you study history, I suppose. But usually there's some big reason. You know, if you pick a person, it's because of the importance of that person. So, you know, maybe this is the only person who's ever done a certain thing, or the most important person in this field, or a person who instigated an important movement, or, you know, a leading abolitionist, or, you know, who knows? If it's about a person, the person's probably unique. Somebody in 1301 was reading a book about, they were reading the Autobiography of Ben Franklin. And I haven't read that thing in a long, long time. You have what? My book has huge amount of inappropriate words. Oh, no, no, no. When I know what book you read. No. If they're using a word and it's a quote and you're quoting them, you just say what they said. You don't have to change up what they said to
Well,
be
no, I do, cause school scans my document and then send me weird stuff if they notice the word, so I have to change it up.
crud. That's one of the cool things about being 14, and sorry if you're a little older, but see, that's terrible. I'm just going to say, I don't mean that your school's terrible or anything, but it really messes with the authenticity of the quote if you have to change the quote. So I think what I would do if I were you is do one of those cool things that, you know, people do when they're joking around and swearing, and they put the word and then some symbols. So maybe like, you know, whatever the first letter, let's say I'm going to swear and I'm talking about poop. So I could put S dash dash T, and then see, you would know I was talking about poop, because even as an adult, for some reason, I can't swear. But you wouldn't have to spell it out. And then maybe your school wouldn't put you in school suspension or send you for counseling or whatever they do.
I don't want to try. School is school, and I can do it in ACC email, but like I don't want to risk it, because if it somehow got saved to my high school drive, then dang, that's a trouble.
Doesn't I mean, your high school has a dual credit program. Don't they know you're in college? Oh my gosh.
Well, it happened once because the professor said that he allows it, so I did it, and they said, well, that's your high school email. I was like, what?
You're making my head hurt. I'm just saying. But anyway, that's do what you have to do, and then you can explain it to me later. If I take points off and forget, then I'll probably remember, because that's just weird.
Yeah, I get your point, because in the start of the book, he kind of says like, I offer you all its pure cruelty and stuff. It means like he's
Yeah.
gonna quote it without, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And there are times, yeah, when people who, you know, real people say bad words, not me, clearly, since I'm weird, but most people do. Yeah, it's kind of normal. So again, not me because I'm weird. But okay, back to the format of the book. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. All right, so here we go. So part one of the book we've already covered. Part two, so where the author's thesis. Oh, I was talking about the autobiography of Ben Franklin, which you clearly aren't going to read because it's, you know, Ben Franklin lived a long time, but not long enough to make it to 1302. And I told this guy, so I don't know. It's been a long time since I read it. And then I went back and looked and I went, oh yeah, he wrote that book mostly just to tell his son what his life was like. Now, that makes it tricky when somebody really just writes to tell you what their life is like, because then you've got to assess why their life was important. And if their goal really was just to write to their son, which really was Ben Franklin's, then you may have to talk about why the son said, you know what, this is cool enough, more people need to read it. Or maybe he just thought, well, I'll make some money that way. And I think with Ben Franklin's son, it was probably both. Just saying. All right. But if it's an autobiography, they still are probably going to tell you why they wrote it. Yeah. Okay. And then you're going to pick some quotes that show what they're trying to prove. You know, if he says, I wrote this, like Ben Franklin wrote to his son to show him how he started off poor but became wealthy. So, and it's going to be through hard work is going to be Ben Franklin's thesis. So then you want to show examples of Ben Franklin working hard. So you go like, hey, in chapter 4, Ben Franklin swam across the English Channel, or whatever. He didn't swim across the English Channel, by the way, but you know, whatever it was that he did, and then show a quote from that section. Okay. So, and you can also say somewhere in there, however, there are times that Ben Franklin was really lazy, and then you can show some quotes when Ben Franklin was really lazy. So not everything you say has to prove the thesis, but it should go along with the thesis or maybe disprove the thesis. So whatever the author's trying to prove when they're writing the book, show some evidence of what they're trying to prove. And then you can talk about that and say, like, this shows that in this way, or I'm not really sure this is the best example. Okay. I'm going to check the chat. You guys got it. All right. Okay. All right. You guys are talking about how you get in trouble in high school. You know, back when I was in school, no computers. We were literally old school. Okay. And then part 3 is what you think about the book. And don't forget in the what you think about the book section to compare it to what you already knew, compare it to stuff in the textbook. And there almost always has to be something either about your subject or about the time period of your subject in the textbook. So even though it may not be about your subject directly, certainly the era that your subject occurs in happens during that time period. You know, there's an era that you can talk about. So if you're talking about, let's say that you're writing a book about, who would you write a book about? Timothy Leary, reading a book about Timothy Leary, who's some kind of unusual Harvard professor who assigns his students to take LSD. It's an interesting homework assignment. No, I'm not assigning you to take drugs as homework. So you would write about him in the Vietnam era, and the book probably mentions him in passing, but it's not going to talk about him very much. So you can say, like, even though the book doesn't mention Timothy Leary, except for on page 1045, where it says he's a weird professor, it does talk about the free speech movement and other things that occurred during this time period, that sort of thing. Okay. All right. And let's see, what else might you want to put? Oh yeah, if you like it, you didn't like it, just don't write that it's boring, because that's not cool. Tell me, you know, if you think they wrote too much about a certain thing or not enough about a certain thing, you wish they'd put more of this, less of that, you thought this was unnecessary, you were frustrated about the style of writing. Any of that stuff is fine, but just the general, it's boring is not really an academic criticism. So. Yeah, and then if you'd recommend it to others, there was one year I had a student read Democracy in America. I think that's the de Tocqueville book. Oh my gosh, that thing is literally 1,000 pages long, and it's about political theory. And I've read some of it, but I haven't read the whole thing because it's, yeah. And this guy in the last part said, I really wouldn't recommend this to most anybody. Unless you just happen to really like this kind of stuff, which I do. Yeah. So he had an unusual desire to read things like that, And he said, unless you have that unusual desire, that you probably won't want to read this book. So, yeah, there you go. Okay, in the chat, maybe see if I can open it. Okay. The the book that the really boring book was, sorry, I shouldn't say that. The one he said most people shouldn't read was Democracy in America. Yeah. There was one book when I taught high school, in person. It was some book about Iwo Jima, and every semester somebody would read that book because I had it in class, and I had a whole shelf of books, and I said, if you don't want to go look for a book, just go back and pick one off the shelf. And guys especially like that because it described all the torture that happened on the Bataan Death March. Um, yeah, if you can't handle gross stuff, there's no way I would read that either. I forget what that book was called, but those guys would steal that book too because it had pictures in it. Dang, high school kids are weird. Sorry. I know some of you are high school kids, but you're weird. You steal books because they have gross pictures. So strange. You could have just taken a photo of it. All right, or buy your own book. Okay. How am I grading the thing? It's either a yes or no. It's very rare that I give you a no. So the no would be no points. And that happens if I'm sure you plagiarized, which does happen, and usually about once a semester. And it's usually really, really obvious. And if I think that you plagiarized, I'll send you a link. I mean, a couple of you have done that during class on a weekly question. And I sent you the link where your stuff's word for word. And I said, don't do this again, or it's time to drop the class. Because, that's true. But on the book review, don't do it. It's too late. I'm just giving you an F. You can't drop the class now. So don't do it on the book review. So the only way you get no points is if it's not accepted. And that would primarily be because you plagiarized. Could also be because I really don't have any confidence that you read the book and you didn't follow the format. But I don't think I've ever given anybody a 0 for that. Because typically people at least read some of the book, or you could get very few points, but yeah, it's hard. Oh, and the deadline is clearly not Monday, November 30th. This was from last fall. Okay. So your deadline is Monday, May 3rd. And submit them in Blackboard in the assignment section. And then I have this list of books, but several of you picked books that aren't on the list, which is 100% completely fine. This is really just a list of a couple of lists of books that I combined from some classes that I either taught or took. But you absolutely don't have to pick books from this list. And I'd much rather you read something, no November 30th, because you want your grade before then. But yeah, I really want you to read something you would like. Yeah. So, and several of you have suggested other stuff. So, and this is the rubric. So 4 points for how you wrote it. So this is why, like, if there are a couple of you in here who don't like to proofread or don't proofread or something. And hey, look, I know that if you don't write well, or if you've picked a book that's not on the list, you probably you have already asked me about it. If not, and you're writing your book review, you probably should go ahead and send me an email and say, like, oh, by the way, this is what I'm reading. But a couple of you already emailed and said, look, I don't like any of those books. Your list is bogus. You didn't say that at all. But yeah, if you haven't, if you picked a book that's not on the list, just send me an email. I hardly ever say no. At this point, I doubt that I would say no because, it's due really quick. But yeah, it does say these are just suggestions. You can substitute anything. Just ask me first. So, oh yeah, rubric. Some of you, you don't proofread your writing. And I'm not going to take off very much on the weekly questions because, there's just no, I'm just not. But I do tend to mention stuff. Sometimes I highlight things about your writing. It's like you don't capitalize stuff. You think you're that old poet E.E. Cummings where there's no capital letters or something, or you randomly capitalize things. you spell somebody's name 5 different ways in your answer, that kind of thing. Don't do that in this paper, okay? Like one of the ones I just read and gave some feedback on, they misspelled the author or the main subject of the book. It's like, you're going to use that guy's name a bunch. I'm going to notice if you misspell that. Also, it seems like pretty much any word processing program you have has some pretty useful grammar check, spell check kind of software kind of embedded. So if there's a little squiggly line under your stuff, you should check it. Like, all these guys with their last names and stuff. But, or like French words that, somehow we've anglicized. So there's usually a sign, check it. And if you're terrible at that kind of stuff, or crowd, if you're dyslexic or something, man, I know, I'm sorry. And I probably, you've probably got an IEP or 504 that says I can't count off, so I won't. But, if you're in that spot, and you don't have the IEP or 504, get someone else to read it and have them help you with just that specific purpose. Usually, I am, when I had to write stuff and submit it, I almost always got, if it was big stuff, not my weekly question kind of stuff, but here with this paper, I would always have at least one other person read it. But yeah, I don't know if you have somebody in your life that wants to read a history book review. Maybe. You said it to me before Friday. All right, so writing skills, use of grammar, usage and mechanics, it needs to be standard, that sort of thing. Also, oh my goodness, I'm seeing this in the weekly questions as well. There's certain words, and I know these are some of the words that one of you was talking about earlier, that are no longer proper to use to describe different groups of people. So, in the 50s, it was okay to say that somebody was, I'm just going to say, Negro. You cannot say that now. No. So if you're using words that are no longer appropriate, you got to quote them. And yeah, we don't say colored. And I know people, well, there's the NAACP. Yeah, we say the NAACP. Nobody says what all those initials start with. So yeah, you could say people of color, but I mean, if people are black, they're black, or African American. I think both of those are still fairly acceptable. And nobody's trying to be, I'm not trying to be like overly picky, too politically correct. They're just standard acceptable words, and they're unacceptable words. So, you know, be cautious of those things. Yeah. I wouldn't say those of color. I think sometimes people say people of color. But I'm just saying, if you're reading an old book and they use words to describe people like I don't know if you hang around old people. I had a principal one time. Oh my gosh. I taught at a school that was fairly white. Shocking. Cedar Park High School. If any of you go to Cedar Park High School, you ever been? It used to be really, really white. Now it's just mostly white. But there was a pretty big influx of Asian students, and I had an older principal, and he would talk about, hey. He would talk about people that were Oriental, and I went, no. I said, no. I said, maybe there's a rug, maybe there's some furniture, but people are Asian, or if you know what country they're from, yeah. And he just looked at me like, no. Oh, well, and let's not talk about high schools. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to start that. But yeah, and I don't, crowd, if you have principals when you're in high school and you think they're racist, it could just be old, but they might be racist too. I mean, because you could find, yeah, like I know that I say things that are not exactly the most, I don't know what the right word is, proper or up to date. And I think some of that is because I'm older and because I'm not reading as many like really, really, really recent stuff. Most of the stuff I read is at least 4 or 5 years old. So I know I really need to update my reading list. I get that. I got it. So, and sometimes you have to judge intent. I know it's tricky, but sometimes, it's not about intent. It's about how it's perceived. Anyway, back to the book review. So, here's how I'm going to grade it. Usually people have trouble in the content areas when content area 1 is really long and content areas 2 and 3 are really short. That's one of my least favorite things. So, when that happens, you're going to lose some points. And the grammar thing, it has to be pretty close to standard. It doesn't have to be perfect. If you make a mistake or two, we all do. If you write the entire book in present or book review in present tense, that's more than a mistake. So, you're going to lose at least a point or so for that. Be careful in that. I will also say, because some of you, oh my gosh, some of you got to have every single point. If you miss a point, something's terrible has gone on. I very rarely give a 20 on the book review. I'm just saying, because almost any, not everybody's perfect. And remember, they're extra points. So you're not, whatever you get is adding to your grade, okay? So like sometimes I would say the average score, I don't know if it's median or average, but they're probably pretty similar, is somewhere around 14 on this assignment. And sometimes people get upset because they go like, that's a 70. I say, you can't look at it like a 70. You got to look at it as 14 points you didn't have before. Now, I also don't want to frustrate you because I know you took extra time to do this, but that's why I add the points on rather than make them as a part of the grade. I don't know if any of that makes sense to you. All right. You guys are talking about school specific stuff there. Let me go back through the chat there and see if I missed something that I shouldn't have missed. Do you guys have other questions about the book review? I apologize because I know there was like book review and then are the old people racist talk right in the middle. So, yeah, all right.
So I was asking about like, you say like, usually the book will match something that happens in that era, like the time around. But like my book starts at end of 1959 and like April of 1960. So it's like half a year.
Yeah,
so
so
what
you're
do I
just
do about it?
You're just going to say, this, while the textbook doesn't specifically mention what's going on or the topic of my book, certainly there are issues with civil rights. And then it's around the era of, and then pick something that happens around that time period. Even if it's the, the Little Rock Central or the beginning of the sit-in movements, that sort of stuff. You just, yours isn't going to be, yours is unusual. I mean, because it is, but you can also talk about the reaction to it. You can talk about anything that happens in the early 60s. It's fine. You can just say that it's a reflection of that era and mention a couple of things that happened in that era. I think that's all right. Let me get rid of this. All right. And I'm
as well, if I may.
I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead, please.
So if I chose Edmund Warren's book on Theodore Roosevelt, correct? Would the best opinion, or would you believe that the best thing to do would to be talking about what his life was like, or how people actually talked about him and how they loved him compared to in the textbook?
I think that's good.
Comparisons.
Yep, I think that works
because
well.
the book is so fast, it's practically 700 pages just talking about the majority of his life.
Yeah.
I whittle it down.
Yep. No, that is tricky because you've got a really big book, and you've got to compare it to a really short discussion in the textbook about this. So, yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I think you're good. And on something like that, I'm not going to be like super harsh either. I'm not going to say like, oh, you really missed the point, because I'm pretty sure you didn't. So, oh, someone got kicked out. All right. Okay, scanning the. Could I make the document? Okay. Oh, you guys were talking about how to get around the. Did you guys spell out a curse word there? All right. Okay. So I don't really see anything in the chat that maybe wasn't. Okay. Oops, maybe. All right. It's hating Cedar Park. That's a lot. Al Capone. Yeah, I think you could talk about stuff that he did, or just kind of the general era, the 20s and 30s. about, how maybe prohibition affected Al Capone. I mean, it affects him pretty dramatically, and it allows him to become wealthy doing criminal things. So I think if you're doing the Al Capone book, you've probably got to mention the Roaring Twenties, Prohibition, and going into the Great Depression. And if you're doing that one that was on the list about Al Capone, one of the things that I would definitely mention is that when that book is done, they talk about how Al Capone really never really got in trouble with the law, that sort of thing. It's because the book was written before he got in trouble with the law. So every once in a while I have a student read that one and they say, but I heard that he was really kind of a gangster and got in trouble with the law, but clearly he didn't. It's like, no, he did. It's just whoever wrote this book is kind of a fan and wrote it before he got arrested. So, and Al Capone really was like weirdly popular in Chicago because he was charitable during the Great Depression. He gave out food and money and stuff like that. And during the Great Depression, people didn't have either of those things. So they thought Capone was pretty cool.
Sorry, that was me. I was gonna ask you a question.
That was you.
Do I have to talk about his criminal things if it's not mentioned in the book?
If it's not mentioned in the book you read?
Like you were saying that like he read it before he actually got in trouble with laws and stuff.
He wrote it. Yeah, he wrote it before he actually gets arrested. Yeah, but I mean, in the book, it doesn't say that he baked bread and became wealthy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, yeah, I mean, I don't think the book denies that he had a criminal enterprise. They're just saying that he didn't get caught or
Like legally in trouble.
Right, didn't get in a lot of trouble. So, yeah. No, I think I would certainly mention that he's at the very least selling alcohol when he's not supposed to, but also, occasionally killing folks who he competes with and, other folks that just get in the way. Ah. All right. Do you guys, biases, perspectives, that kind of stuff, that goes in part 3. And if you're not sure, everyone has a bias. We all do. It's just you may or may not realize what it is, which is fine. So you can always say, like, if you're not sure, there's really no detectable bias. But if you know something, usually in the book, it'll tell you there's a little about the author section. If you look through that, it'll usually tell you stuff like where they're from, where they went to college, what their family did, that sort of stuff. All of those things kind of lead to biases, I think, potential biases as well. So, or perspective, it might help you understand their perspective or what they did for a living. Teddy Roosevelt, if you're writing about him, because he grows up wealthy and he sees himself kind of in this noblesse oblige role where, because I grew up wealthy and went to Harvard and don't really have to work for a living, then my job really is to help other people who are less fortunate. So sometimes in that progressive era, and this is I think a fair criticism of progressives in that era. I'm not saying the modern era, you guys decide all that stuff. One of the fair criticisms of progressives is that they see themselves on another level and they want to help you go up to their level. So they sort of view you as unequal, which you are economically, but they see one as they kind of see one as better and one is not as good. So they don't really want to understand the culture of the people they're helping. They want to change the culture of the people they're helping. And most of us are okay with that because the way they're changing the culture is maybe by giving them more education or opportunities, but they also want to make those people more like them. And all that stuff's kind of, the more you think about it, I think it can give you a headache, if you like. It's a little weird. And then you have to decide at what point is somebody trying to help, and at one point is somebody just trying to change somebody's culture, and is changing somebody's culture truly helping them? And it kind of depends on what the part of the culture is that you want to change, because if there's a family culture or I don't know, a regional culture that looks abusive or dangerous, then maybe that is something you want to change. But that's tricky stuff. I say this as somebody who grew up in a very, very poor region of the country, whose family is really uncomfortable with them because my family's super uncomfortable with me because I went to college. And the thought in me going to college is, so what we do isn't good enough for you. It's like, I can't build a deck, I mean, or I can't make meth, or, whatever it is you guys do for a living. It's not what I do. So I don't have the same skills or desires. So college is like, that was my only hope for a job. So that kind of cultural change is different than, oh gosh, it's complicated. But yeah, their bias, their perspectives, you can probably figure some of that out by looking who they are, what they did for a living, where they lived, that kind of thing. And also, sometimes our culture and bias are affected by what we're exposed to, who we hang out with, all that kind of stuff. It does shape us. And the culture or the bias or perspective, it isn't necessarily, I would never suggest that the goal here is to find out why somebody's wrong or evil. It's just they see the world in a different way. We all do. It is true. We all do. And we're supposed to. Yeah. But there are certain people that are writing a book and they're really, really, right of center or left of center. And you'll be able to tell by how they talk about certain subjects in their book. So. All right. Anything else book review that you want to talk about? We've talked a lot about book review. It's good though. It's due really soon. Although some of you are going like, I'm not writing this thing. You just wasted my time. Well, sorry. I didn't mean to. Okay. All right. Do you have anything else you want to ask about the book review? All right. Okay. I'm going to go with that as a no. I'm going to take a drink. Coke Zero. It's the best. Okay.
Oh, yeah, I have a question. Do you even look at email like on Saturday or Sunday? Cause I don't have time tomorrow. I have stuff. So I don't know.
I'm saying if you send me something Saturday or Sunday, it's going to be hit or miss because I know I say this all the time, maybe too much. I really do run a soccer league on the weekend. So we have soccer on Friday night. This weekend, we have soccer from 9 a.m. till 10 p.m. on Saturday. I know. I hope I'm not out there the whole time. And then we've got soccer from 2 to 8 on Sunday. So I go, and I play piano at church. So I go music rehearsal, church, soccer, and then I'm home at 8. And then you may or may not want me reading your stuff after that much soccer. So, yeah.
But it's still Monday midnight, right?
I know, but that doesn't mean that I want to read it on Sunday at midnight.
Oh yeah, true. Like if you have blank time during Monday, maybe you can. I don't know. It's your time, so yeah.
No, I'm just saying it'll be hit or miss. Send it. I'm not going to say it's not going to happen, but yeah, send it. I'm just not going to make any promises. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, of course.
All right. And I'm not telling you I don't want to do it. I'm telling you, dang, yeah. Usually I do stuff in the morning, but I'm going to somebody's funeral on Friday. So yeah. So yeah, early Friday, and then usually I'm done with soccer by 9 on Friday, so sometimes I can look at it in the evening. But yeah, earlier is better. But if you send it Friday, I'll make time to look at it. If you send it Saturday or Sunday, I'll do my best. All right. I really don't remember where we were talking about. Oh, I think we talked about Clinton last time. Did we talk about, oh no, we didn't talk about contract with America, I don't think. All right. And crud, I already forgot what our weekly question was. And it's next week anyway. Oh, we have to look at the due dates too. I may need to change the due date, right? So the weekly question's about George Bush. So we got to finish. Oh yeah, that's an interesting question, isn't it? Bush commented in his 2001 inaugural address that America had gone out to into the world to protect, not to possess, and defend, not to conquer. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? Give examples to support your position. All right, and let me look really quick. At the due dates, because you guys said they're different on the syllabus than they are on something else. Okay. So on, let's see, this is on Blackboard. It says weekly question 13 for 27 due on the 7th, and weekly question 14 due on the 14th. So chapter 27 on the 7th, 28 on the 14th. So I definitely will go with that. And if you need me to, I can go back. Oh yeah, because I remember I messed up your due dates. I thought I reposted those. Maybe I made a mistake on those. But the chapter 27 on the 7th and chapter 28 on the 14th is fine. I think that's when school ends, right? Guys are making me nervous now because we still have 2 more weeks after this week, right? I'm pretty sure I'm right. Okay. Everything's kind of blending together here at the end, isn't it? Sorry, but I'll double check on that. But yeah, I'm fine with not having them both due on the same day. Yeah, that wasn't my intention. Okay. Bill Clinton. I was looking, apparently I'm always teaching about Bill Clinton this time of year because I noticed a weird little Facebook memory kind of thing where, no, cut it out. No free 100. You guys trying to get me fired. I always do mention when I talk about Bill Clinton that he played the saxophone and people thought he was cool. And he went on those TV talk shows at night where he would talk about, they would ask him questions like, what sort of underwear do you wear, boxers or briefs? And he would tell them. And I would say, in one way, he's like my brother Jim, who was a good saxophone player, but my brother Jim would not talk to you about his underwear. But we liked Clinton because he was younger, he was kind of cool, he was kind of hip, but younger, and we didn't know him, and that was cool as well. I feel like we talked about how he chose Al Gore. Yeah, we did talk about a lot of this stuff. So Al Gore, what happened here? I'm so confused. Let me find the right place in the notes. That is not, that was last week. Bush, old Bush, 92 Bush, Bill Clinton and Al Gore. They ran together. They're both from the middle of the country. They're both youngish. They have a lot of things in common. Al Gore was really, I know he's the climate guy, but he was really conservative in some ways as well. And the way in which he was conservative is really culturally conservative. And his wife wanted to censor a whole lot of popular music. I remember that because it was just so odd and kind of, it was just out of the middle of nowhere. But I think it was to appeal, I know it was, to appeal more to that religious right that had really started to favor the Republicans during the Reagan administration. So, you know, to try to counteract the kind of wild nature in some ways of Bill Clinton, Al Gore and his wife wanted to censor pop music and that sort of thing, which was interesting. And also interesting, you know, Gore sort of portrayed himself as the more religious, conservative, family values kind of guy, more so than Clinton. And Clinton is still married to his wife and Gore is not. But I know that also the Clintons had a difficulty. I believe we talked about that already. So we did. So we talked about all the Clinton scandals. We talked about the Oklahoma City bombing. You know, for some reason, Oklahoma City bombing, and the terrorist, the homegrown domestic terrorist groups, militia groups that we see forming in the Northwest during that time period, and The next section talks about the cultural changes that occur during this era. So we'll hit the general stuff here. And your book has specific stuff that backs this up a little bit more. And we may or may not, because it's kind of late-ish, we may or may not spend a whole lot of time going over the weekly question today, but we can do that Tuesday, because it's not really due till next week. So we can spend much more time on it Tuesday if you like. I'll try to hit it a little bit, in case some of you are going to do it this weekend, but no rush on that. So the computer changes everything. We'd already mentioned that it revolutionizes commerce. They have the .com businesses, the online business. And at first that's a little iffy, but now of course everybody buys tons of stuff from Amazon, and we shop online all the time. And you guys use the I don't even know what it is, the cryptocurrency with the dog or something that's new. I don't know anything about stuff like that. But I saw somebody posting about it, or I read a news story about it or something. But yeah, all that computer revolution stuff starts during this time period. I sound like an old person when I talk like that. But it does change how we do stuff, and maybe Al Gore invented the internet, which I don't believe is exactly how it happened, but certainly it starts off in part as a defense industry project. But then becomes pretty standard stuff. And this is an era where we start to use email and do all kinds of stuff online. We don't quite have the standard cell phone, but by the end of the 90s, you'll get, it's pretty common to at least have a flip phone. So how we communicate, how we do everything is revolutionized because of the computer. And this also changes the workplace pretty dramatically. Some of you were writing about how when Reagan did the PATCO, how he treated the PATCO employees when they struck was the end of union power. I get that. I mean, I see why you would say that, but that's not completely it. The computer revolution is part of it, but also the shift away from American manufacturing, which you start to see in the 70s with automobile and steel manufacturing, which shifts first to Japan and then shifts away from Japan to China as far as steel manufacturing. So a lot of the manufacturing jobs are outsourced because people in other countries will work for less money. And the union jobs had produced these really high wages and benefits, which was really good for the American middle class, but the American manufacturer and consumer didn't want, the manufacturer wanted more profit and the consumer wanted lower prices. And when you could import cars from Japan that were lower prices and maybe had better gas mileage, then you start to see shifts in those industries. And those were a lot of the really high paying union jobs. And then you see those jobs shift out of the country and they're no longer high paying overseas. And then a lot of the other sorts of jobs, some of the manufacturing, some of them accounting, that kind of thing, are really taken over by computers. And I don't mean artificial intelligence, although, there are some robots that do some of the work, but when an accountant can be replaced by an accounting program, something along those lines, you're going to see a shift in how work is done. So we really start to shift away from a manufacturing society to a service and technology society. And this really has an impact on the middle and lower class, the economic lower class, because they don't have the training to adapt to the changes in the work environment. So computer revolution and globalization is really hard on the folks in the middle. The folks at the top will adjust and they'll stay at the top. The folks at the bottom tend to have limited resources to start with, so this probably limits the resources even more in some ways. The folks in the middle, especially the ones who had factory jobs, if they don't adapt, then what happens, and that certainly does start to happen in the Reagan administration, you start to see the middle class, which was growing, start to decline. And there are lots of factors that lead to that. And certainly, I know that some of you wrote that the Reaganomics, trickle-down economics, supply-side economics, you believe is part of that. And you can make a case for that for sure. But there are lots of things going on to the economy during this time period that people don't adjust to and that are hard to adjust to. And I was listening to the president's speech last night, and he was talking about, if 12 years of education, is that still enough? And, I say, as a person who taught high school for a very long time and teaches community college, 12 years might be enough if we restructured how it was delivered and why it was delivered, because we still operate on a model that we want everyone to have a general liberal arts education, which, hey, I was an English teacher and a history teacher when I taught in public schools, so I'm certainly not opposed to liberal arts. But if you want to be a computer technician, we could focus more on the technical skills you needed, and you could get those the last couple of years of high school. And while you're trying to figure out, do you want to go to college? Do you not want to go to college? You could work at a pretty decent job with those skills while you figured that out. So, we've had this sort of revolution with our technology. We haven't really changed how we educate you. And I realize right now we're talking about history online and we're not all in the same room. So we may have changed some of the technology that we use to educate you, but we haven't changed the overall structure of what we think you need to be educated. So this sort of leads to some of those questions: what needs to change, what doesn't? Contract with America, these were conservatives who said we don't need any more Democrats. These guys are free spenders and we've had enough of them. So when the contract with America is made and then Clinton wins re-election, they declare the era of big government to be over. I kind of vaguely remember that speech. So in 1994, Republicans ran as a group with the contract with America, and we elect a whole bunch of Republicans in 1994, switches over control of the House. Newt Gingrich becomes the Speaker of the House, and they want term limits, and they want to decrease spending on the education, environment, medical care, term limits, balanced budget. So they want all of those things. And they get approximately none of those things. Yeah. Well, no, we do decrease some spending on social programs. There's no term limits, really. We balanced the budget sort of kind of for 1 year. We didn't pay off the debt, but there was 1 year where we did not spend more than we took in. So yeah, balanced budget. And now I think no one cares about debt. It's my impression. Cultural changes, new folks, lots of new folks, which means we're different culturally, and whatever used to be normal or typical. And I think it's why, you see some of the changes that you guys were talking about in your high schools, where, before maybe you had administrators who said certain things out loud, either because they're racist and they meant them, or they're not cautious, or they're out of step. And, we need to, as a country, we're different when we get new immigrants. And that's the way our country's always been. It's always been about immigration. I mean, it's not the, I know I have friends that tell me like, no, the country was founded on religious principles. It's like, well, maybe a couple of colonies were, but I mean, the whole purpose of the country, to the Native American chagrin, seemed to be immigration. So when new groups came, it necessarily changes who we are. And you know this on a micro scale when you get like a new family member, if you're like a new kid is born or somebody marries in. And if somebody that marries in is from a different culture, your family just changed. And that's the way it is. It's probably good. Hopefully it's good. But you got to adjust and you got to adapt and accept. So the adjust, adapt, accept thing with 38 million new immigrants, and those are primarily documented immigrants from all different parts of the country where we had, prohibited immigration from before. This is going to necessarily change who the country is. And the racial makeup of the country changes pretty dramatically during this era to where Latino, Hispanic groups as a group are the second largest ethnic group, largest minority group. But you also notice that there are huge differences within those cultural groups. Like if you, and they're not monolithic either, but like I have my husband, all of his grandparents were from Mexico, and within his family were intensely conservative people and much more liberal people. And the other thing that you would notice is because of the tendency of Mexican Americans to be Catholic, it's a big tendency, they're much more conservative on social issues than you might expect in some ways. So they're definitely they tend to be very pro-life, and there are other, and they're also anti-death penalty, which is kind of consistent for the Catholic Church, I think, because they don't want you to kill the babies or the criminals. They don't want you killing folks. So the pre-folks or the in trouble folks. But within the Hispanic or Latino group, you might have, people who are from Cuba who tend to be more conservative, people from, I've got neighbors from Puerto Rico, and they tend to be much more liberal. So it kind of depends on where they're from. Yeah. And also within the family or within different socioeconomic groups. I mean, it just depends what you do for a living. And a lot of times too, what forms your political opinions, not always true, where you live and how much money you have. So, and there are different immigrants coming from different places who tend to get different sorts of education and value different things. And it really gets to the point where if you had stereotypes before, this is probably a good time to abandon a lot of them because things just don't fit, which is fine. It means we got to relearn stuff, or the old stuff never worked anyway, which is often true. The three strikes laws, these really, you kind of see the beginning of that with the war on drugs that a lot of you mentioned in the Reagan question. And you see this codified more, put into law more during the Clinton administration. So you have this era, this Reagan, Bush, Clinton era, where we're really conservative on law enforcement, and to the point of being, I think almost everybody agrees now, repressive. I know there are probably like 2 or 3 people like, no, lock them up. But, this is the era, and I know we talked last time about the difference in laws about crack cocaine versus punishment about crack versus cocaine. But, and it's always true that if you have more money and a better lawyer, you're going to get a different punishment. That's just always true. And during this time period, especially during this war on drugs, you start to see the police becoming a little more militarized when we kind of have them back off a bit in the 70s. So you see a change there. Rights revolution, we definitely talked about this before. We talked about all this stuff before. Why didn't you tell me? So Defensive Marriage Act, which really was supported up through the first Obama administration. And then when the Supreme Court rules it to be unconstitutional, then you start to see politicians go like, yeah, no, that makes sense. And then change their minds about that, either because they really changed their minds or they don't want to lose support. And either way, they changed their minds. And I think I already mentioned last time the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas thing. Goodness, you guys let me go over all that stuff again. That's okay though. It'll be on the quiz, so it'll be good. All right. And then the Bush stuff, and this will kind of lead us into the very short talk, because I know I'm about to get the warning, the very short talk about the weekly question. 2000 election, we have Bush versus Gore, closest election in US history. It was less than half a point, and really determined by a few counties in Florida. And that thing was a mess. I remember it quite well. And ends up with a Supreme Court case essentially deciding who the president is, which made many people feel like Bush was selected, not elected. And he really, it's a super close election anyway. Bush was a relative unknown from Texas. I mean, we knew him as a governor and we were okay with him, But the rest of the country's like, that's just George H.W. Bush's son. We don't know very much about him. And Al Gore, we'd already seen him as vice president. Also kind of a sign that when you run for president as vice president, it doesn't always go well. Sometimes it does. Sometimes you get a term, sometimes you don't. But Bush becomes president and then pretty quickly passes the largest tax cut in US history to stimulate a slightly sluggish economy. And this is going to be kind of similar to a Reagan tax cut, but then 9/11. So 9/11 is 2001, and we are going to declare a war on terrorism, which is going to be a preemptive war, and there's going to be a lot of odd things that happen there. Now, let's see. The quote from the inauguration, because this is probably where we want to start talking about the weekly question. Let me peek in the book, because I think that comes from, all right. So when Bush is talking about how let's look at the quote again. Sorry. Weekly questions 1301. Go. When he mentions in the inaugural address that America had gone out to protect, not possess, and defend, not to conquer, you got to remember this is before 9/11. That doesn't mean you can't mention 9/11 in your answer. You absolutely can. And you can mention where we sent troops and why we sent troops and strategy of preemptive war. And if you think that's right or wrong, you can absolutely talk about all those things. However, don't make that all of your answer, because when he says this, 9/11 hasn't happened. And we haven't, the World Trade Center wasn't bombed, and we didn't declare war on terrorism. So I really think if I'm answering this question, I start off with the quote, and I just say in his 2001 inaugural address, George Bush said that we had gone out into the world to protect and not possess, and defend, not to conquer. And then I would say, like, before Bush's presidency, here's some examples of where we sent the military. And I would pick 2 or 3 20th century examples. I think more recent stuff is better. I would probably not go earlier than World War II. I would probably go more recent. I would probably mention World War II, maybe mention Korea, maybe mention Vietnam. But you could mention even more recent stuff. You could go with Vietnam and stuff we had done in the Middle East as well, or the Balkans. But pick 2 or 3 things that happened. For me, I think I would pick World War II or later, and pick 2 or 3 times when we sent troops. But I would pick examples where sometimes it looks like we went to protect and defend, and sometimes it looks like we went to possess and to conquer. And there are going to be some times where it looks like we're probably doing both. And maybe there's some times where you're not sure we're doing either. Because I think with Korea, it's pretty clear, like they ask us to push people out of their country, and we did. And that was kind of the scope of it. And you see that with the Gulf War too, with Saddam Hussein, and Kuwait says, help. Now, you can easily argue that the only reason we're going there is to protect the oil supply, and because there were other people we ignored. You can argue that, and you'd be successful at doing that. I'm not saying that you couldn't, but the Balkans in particular, and maybe in protecting Kuwait in the Gulf War, we are going in and we're doing this in a way that may be as a response to somebody asking for help. And you might be able to argue that with Korea. With Vietnam, because there's no real discernible strategy and we stay for half of our lives, I don't know I don't know if we're protecting, defending, possessing, conquering. Who even knows what we're doing in Vietnam except blowing the crap out of Vietnam? Now, you can easily argue, oh my goodness, so many of my relatives would just disown me if they heard me say that. But I do realize, and I realize that the popular reason that we go into those Cold War era conflicts is because we want to stop the spread of communism. And we're sure that communism is evil and godless, as we've mentioned. And certainly we see examples of how bad leaders are in the Soviet Union and China and some other communist countries. However, what we did in Vietnam probably wasn't terribly helpful and didn't make it very much more democratic. So, yeah. And yeah, the oil, yeah. It's not going to be hard for you to find times when you think that we went to possess and conquer. Yeah. I would try really hard to find at least one example where you think we probably went to protect and defend. And, maybe Kuwait's probably not the shining pure example of that because there is some oil, but the Balkans and the stuff that happens to stop the spread of ethnic cleansing, you could use that. But you can also mention that we went to European places to stop that, but we didn't go to Asian or African places to stop that. So, all right. But this question, the only thing that I would just be really careful about, try to find both sides of the question and try to talk about things before Bush's presidency in addition to Bush's presidency, because when he makes that comment, he hasn't done anything yet. So he's just talking about how great America is and how we're good and we're fundamentally good and we want to spread our goodness throughout the world. Now, I'm somewhere in the middle of that. I know some of you, I've read your papers this semester. Some of you we've never done a good thing ever, and all we do is terrible. I think we're somewhere more in the middle than you might think is my qualification for a superpower. As far as superpowers go, we're about as benevolent as you're going to get, but we still behave like a superpower. I'm not saying that any of it's justifiable. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. 3-minute warning. It's good timing for that because I don't want to get myself in any trouble by making some rash statement where you guys will just go, she's crazy. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing here. Do you guys have any questions you want to ask before we go? I think that the Bush question is kind of an interesting question, and I don't think you'll have trouble with it. Just try to say something on both sides of the issue, protect and defend, and invade and conquer, possess and conquer. Invade. Yeah, because there are clearly times that we're being, I don't even know. Yeah, Vietnam, because we didn't really need to take over Vietnam. That was, I don't know. I didn't tell you a page number because it's not all from that chapter. The Bush stuff really kind of happens at the end of 27 in the beginning of 28. So around page 1015 or so to probably 1020, somewhere in there. But yeah, Vietnam, I think you could use as either because what we're trying to protect against is the spread of communism. And I suppose what we're trying to possess is control of the economy and government of other countries. So in that instance, it's not so much financial or there's definitely not oil. We're not necessarily trying to control the land, although we do want to control an area very close to China and the Soviet Union. So there's strategic reasons for that as well. So I think you could use that for both, but in the long run, I would think the possess and control, I already forgot. But yeah, the less positive stuff, I think you're going to end up arguing more of that because of how we proceed in the war, how we prosecute the war. It seems like our goal there is to stay a long time rather than accomplish something and leave. That makes sense. But it's super, everything in history is complicated and complex. So, all right, I'm going to stop recording.